if we think about purpose, we're often thinking about the existential, right? Like, what am I on this planet to do? And I think that's a natural inclination. But if you think about Ikigai through the lens of Sekatsu or daily life, it's essentially, am I aligning my actions to my priorities on a daily basis? And if I have a lifetime of those days, then I'm living my reason for being, which gives us a lot more agency and control on essentially purpose. I mean, it's not like I'm constantly striving to get to that next checkpoint.
From the Grit Institute, this is the Grit Factor podcast. And I'm Shannon Huffman Polson, former Apache helicopter pilot, speaker, and author of The Grit Factor, Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the most male-dominated organization in the world. I'm also the founder of the Grit Institute, where I help purpose-driven leaders like you build grit and resilience and connect with purpose so that you can navigate transitions, overcome challenges, and lead with impact in your work for a better world. For over a decade now, I've been exploring a question that's guided philosophers, poets, and leaders across cultures. What does it really mean to live with purpose? Purpose came out as one of the foundational principles of grit and resilience in researching the Grit Factor. But as I went deeper into purpose, I came across the Japanese concept of Ikigai, often translated as a reason for being. But Ikigai isn't simply about passion or profession. It's about awareness. It's about being present. It's about noticing. It's about living in the space where purpose meets presence and being present enough to recognize it. My guest today, Sam Ushio, has spent years helping people and organizations find that alignment after a shift in his own life. His family's story began in Japan, a story of migration and resilience and adaptation that carried forward a deep reverence for balance, community, purpose, and an obligation. Those values shaped Sam's worldview long before he had a word for them. And as he built his career in the corporate world, they began to call him back towards something older and truer and more whole. My guest, Sam Ushio, is the founder of Ikigai Lab, working with leaders across industries to connect meaning with measurable impact, to bring humanity back into business. But for Sam, Ikigai isn't just professional, it's personal. Today, we're talking about that journey. Let's take off. Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much for joining the Grit Factor. It's terrific to see you, at least on the computer screen, and to have you here to share your many experiences and insights around Ikigai.
Thank you, Shannon. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you as fellow travelers in the purpose world and purpose-driven work.
Purpose-driven work. It absolutely is purpose-driven work. And one of the things that comes out of a lot of the conversations that I think both of us have, and certainly the conversations that went into the Grit Factor, is that our stories of origin, our stories of where we came from, shape us, and they shape us in important and meaningful ways. And we don't always recognize it early on. It can be something that develops over time. I know this is something that you have really spent time on and looked at with some deep intention. And I wondered if you share a little bit about your family's story and when it is that you realized that there was something there that you really wanted to connect to in a meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I live in Seattle. I grew up in rural Nebraska in a small town of 9,000 people in western Nebraska called Alliance, Nebraska. And went through the process of going to high school and college and finding a job. And my initial launch into my professional career was in financial services. And I was in the financial services space for roughly about 20 years, kind of followed a very traditional route up until about the midpoint in life. 40 years old, a month and a day is when I had this lightning bulb moment, which we could talk about.
Yes.
But my focus is on this Japanese concept of Ikigai, which is a Japanese concept that is 1,000 years old. It can be interpreted as your reason for being, and the inspiration for my evolution. That's probably the best way to describe it. Pivot, evolution, however you want to describe it. is largely influenced by my great grandparents who immigrated to the United States in the early 1900s.
Now
So
that's so 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago.
more than 100 years ago. I believe my great grandfather came to America in 1907, 1906, right around there, early 1900s.
Do you know
Uh,
what brought them to the U.S.? I don't know if I know that part of the story.
yeah, so my great grandfather's name was Shigeo, and he was the eldest son. There was a Shinto shrine that the family was a part of, and as the eldest son, he was the next in line to be the head of the shrine. Um, and the shrine and the community that depended on the shrine was under strain, and right around this time period before he came to America. And so they looked at him as the eldest son and said, "It's time for you to go in to America to basically save the day, because the shrine, this 1,200-year-old shrine, and the community that depends on it is under strain, and we need you to go save the day. So you're going to go to America at 18 years old, and you're going to make money and then hopefully like preserve the legacy of the shrine." So he came to America in the early 1900s, based on that pressure. Not the pressure that I had as an 18-year-old, that's for sure. So they came over to America and realized that people were not tripping over wealth. There was hardship. And there's really two chapters to their story that really inspired me. It really started to shape my perspective on a more expansive view in terms of what is purpose, and led me to the concept of Ikigai. So in 1919, right around there, they had just had their third child. They had been in the States for over a decade. Over that time, they were sending money, food, and clothing over to the community in Japan to preserve the legacy of the shrine and support the community. And they just had their third child. So the demands of running a cleaner's business outside of Salt Lake City, the demands of managing a family, and the demands of supporting a legacy on the other side of the world was just too much. They made this decision that they were going to send the three children back to Japan to stay with family so that the two of them could focus on running this cleaner's business. And they ported here in Seattle and took a picture. And that picture was a picture that I found at a very meaningful inflection point within my life at almost the 100-year anniversary of it being taken. And there's a lot of symbolism and, universe is speaking to me type of stuff, because the ages of the kids in that picture were the ages of the kids of my children when I had departed on this new journey. So I was just looking at this picture, kind of realizing, looking out at the Puget Sound, that they jumped on a boat, or my great grandmother Taka jumped on a boat with three kids, and kind of made this really difficult decision in support of something much bigger than themselves. And so that really started to shape my view.
But what brought you to the place where you were open to that symbol, where you were either looking for or ready for, or particularly able to bring that into you and into the work and the consideration that you were in the midst of?
Yeah, so this background in financial services, roughly about the last decade that I spent in financial services, I was leading a management consulting team that was working with approximately 1,000 financial advisors per year. And so the work that we were doing was substantial. And I started to observe that the word growth was everywhere in the industry, always defined by financial growth. So it's grow the P&L, grow the enterprise value, and simultaneously I was observing that personal growth was often being compromised on the quest for financial growth in a lot of these leaders that I was working with. And so I started to just lock in on that observation, and that word growth just started to be everywhere. And then the light bulb went off, and I realized that everything that I'm complaining about is everything that I'm living on a personal basis. So I'm compromising my personal growth for financial growth. Had child number 3, and so that was a moment that really kind of opened me up. And there was a midlife thing, right? So I was 4 years old and a month and a day when I had this light bulb moment at a financial services conference in Midtown Manhattan, New York City. And so that was when I started to chart my course. Initially, I took 6 months living here in Seattle, went to business school at the University of Washington, leaned really heavily on the network and the business community here to essentially get in front of leaders and learn, what do you do for leadership? How does it drive toward innovation? And in those conversations at these global brands like, Microsoft and Amazon, Starbucks and Nordstrom and all these big brands, I was finding these topics like systems thinking and human-centered design and strengths-based positive psychology and emotional intelligence and all this stuff that was new to me at 40 years old with an MBA, running a successful management consulting team in financial global asset management. I was just like, where has this been my entire life? And
Right.
so that started to reinforce some of this conceptual notion that financial growth and personal growth don't need to be mutually exclusive. Somewhere in there is this recipe that those two can exist in harmony and actually propel each other. So it led me down this journey of trying a bunch of creative stuff that did not work. It was flopping. It was missing everywhere. I was all over the place. And I hit this low.
Sam, before you go on from that, tell me a little bit about that, because I think that's important for me to hear. I think it's important for listeners to hear that you have to try different things and they're not all going to work out. So what did that start out like and what did that look like, just for a minute or two?
Yeah. So probably the signature example during this stage was the Museum of Pop Culture is here in Seattle. It's right next to the Space Needle. It's Paul Allen's kind of Jimi Hendrix exhibit and a bunch of really interesting, cool stuff. So I thought that's a very unique place. And I would love to take financial advisors into that space and challenge them to think like a curator on why the curator for the world's first Marvel exhibit, why they put Iron Man here, why they put Hulk there, and how does that apply to curating the client experience and the employee experience, and doing just a really creative stuff that was fulfilling for me. But
Yes.
for the target demographic that I was working with, it was just too out there.
Okay.
And so it was scratching an itch on a personal basis, but it just wasn't, it was misaligned and it was not sustainable. And so there was just a lot of that wasn't clicking the way that it needed to click. And that's when I hit this wall. It's just like, oh my gosh, 18 months in, like, what have I done here?
Have you
And
quit
that's
your
when I
job
found
at
this
this
picture.
point? Are you
I
done?
had, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
so that's a big deal.
I'm 18 months into my entrepreneurial journey at that point, with 3 kids, below the age of 10, probably even below the age of 8 at that point. So I left a great job, great company, great team, steady paycheck. Everything was great. And then I find myself doing stuff like this, and it's not hitting the traction that I anticipated. It's not even close. So that's when I find this picture and get reacquainted with this story. And at the time, purpose to me was very egocentric. It was very, it was about scratching that itch, right? That creative itch and doing these interesting things. And then I find the story and realize that this concept of Ikigai through the lens of, Shigeo Taka's journey really just was expansive. There was abundance there that just helped me realize, wait, they did something 100 years ago that's not that far back. And they had very serious sacrifice and commitment to something bigger than self.
Where did you come across the picture?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the picture had appeared, in life a number of times. The first time I went to Japan was in 2001. So it definitely, like, that picture was there then, and it had appeared in different family albums. It kind of just, it was right around Christmas time. It was like that probably Black Friday, there was that period between Thanksgiving and that couple days that follow where, at least in our house, we start, getting out the Christmas stuff and all these things. It's just slightly controlled chaos. And the picture just was in a box. It was in a box in this binder from that trip in 2001. And it just happened to appear. And what was strange was that it was almost the 100-year anniversary of that picture being taken. So there's just, there was just, sometimes the universe speaks to you and you have to just be open to it and listen to it. And I started to just go a little bit deeper into that. Now, however many years later, we're here.
And now you come across the picture, it's close to the 100th anniversary, the story behind it because your family has shared this. Where does the idea of Ikigai start to come in? And then how do you start to think that this journey and this photo and what it represents might mean something for you?
Yeah. So the this was at this key inflection. So I had been like researching Ikigai a little bit up until that. A very influential person in my life is my auntie Julie, who lives in Hawaii, and she had been exploring this and really making conscious decisions in her life based on this framework um, of Ikigai, and also as the family historian that bridged the two families back together between Japan and the U.S. in the 1980s. She actually did oral history with great grandma Taka and kind of uncovered all of this texture of the family story. If she doesn't do that, none of this happens. So she's been very influential in my life. And so I'd started to research the concept of Ikigai, just curious about it, found the four circle Venn diagram and was like, oh, that's an interesting, it's a pretty four circle Venn diagram and it's simple and so I started to go down that path and then found this story and I was like, wait, that doesn't map to what I'm interpreting from my Japanese heritage. And so that started to lead me down this journey of exploration on what is the true essence of Ikigai through Japanese scholars.
Now, before
And
you
so
get into that, let's just refresh this four circle Venn diagram, which I just think this is fascinating that this is somewhat universally accepted almost as what Ikigai is. And it is not at all Ikigai. I mean, there might be some tangential connection, but describe that and describe how you understood that was disconnected from what it was that your experience showed you.
Yeah. Let's start with the four circle Venn diagram has four questions. What do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? And what can you get paid to do?
Which are good questions, right? In fairness.
Great questions. Great questions. Very important questions for anybody for most people at most stages in life. If you're retired, you probably don't need to think about that last question as much. But So I'll come back to Taka's story. There's a second part to this story that's especially inspiring to me that, I grew up in Alliance, Nebraska. Taka, we fast forward to 1939. Taka is living in rural Nebraska. At this point, she has 2 kids in Japan. She has 4 kids in America. Her husband has just died, so she's widowed. She's running the cleaners business by herself. And 18 months later, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. So now she has, and this is 30 years into still sending money and food and clothing over to the community to preserve the legacy of this ancient shrine. She has a son who gets drafted into the Japanese army. She has a son who enlists in the American army. That's my grandfather, Grandpa Sam. So Grandpa Sam joins the 442 Battalion, all Japanese Americans out to prove their allegiance to America.
Yes.
Throughout all of this is Taka persevering, running his cleaners business day by day. So she loses the son to the Japanese army, or in the war, who's part of the Japanese army. Grandpa Sam comes back a decorated war hero. And the legacy of the Shinto shrine, Imori Shrine in Fukuoka, still stands today, representative of Taka and Shigeo and everyone's efforts. So when I think about the concept of Ikigai, Taka was running a cleaner's business, right? That's what she was paid to do.
Yes.
She wasn't doing it because hit all these four circles. She was doing it for something that was textured and nuanced and definitely beyond self. So I think that's the use case for me on a personal basis that really started to ask the question, I don't think this is right, because I'm seeing it through a very different lens. And then Dan Buettner is a National Geographic researcher. He wrote Blue Zones, done a lot of work on the Blue Zones.
Yes.
He was probably the main person that brought this concept to the West through National Geographic in 2003, I believe. Buettner does a good job of connecting the concept of Ikigai to longevity. So when he was conducting his research and interviewing 107-year-olds and found that they were referencing this concept of Ikigai, they weren't talking about the job that they had at 107 years old. They weren't talking about the job that they had 50 years ago. They were talking about intentionality, presence in the moment. So I think that's the challenge with the four circle Venn diagram. It's not to say that four circle Venn diagram doesn't have application. I think that can help equip a lot of people who are grappling with questions about job and career and purpose in terms of how I want to show up at work. But
Yes.
it's not the concept of Ikigai. Ikigai is much more expansive.
Yeah, it's a lot more sort of targeted in a sense, right? And it's a very useful framework, but it's a different framework. So I'm so grateful that your work is starting to expose the fact that that's been a misunderstanding, that there's so much more that we can understand if we really embrace and look to know more about this understanding that comes from your history and your culture.
Yeah, the first presentation that I gave once I made that pivot to Ikigai, well, actually I did a workshop, 2-hour workshop with 11 willing participants at a co-working space. But the first main stage presentation that I gave was called the Ikigai myth. And so it was like, how do you just start to dispel this myth through relatable stories? At the time I was using Bill Murray as the signature example of why Ikigai, the 4-circle Venn diagram, is not Ikigai, because Bill Murray personifies Ikigais. We've evolved the storytelling a bit since then, but
It's great.
but Bill Murray is a use case on Ikigai.
Sure. So talk about what it does mean and how it is that you started that exploration. You understand that the 4-circle Venn diagram I believe that's actually the result of work from a Spanish consultant, if I'm correct, right?
It is.
Yes.
It's kind of an amalgamation of that work by that Spanish consultant on purpose, and then
Yes.
a blogger named Mark Wynn, who just on a whim saw that work, took out whatever the Spanish word was in the middle and dropped an Ikigai and put it on a blog, and it caught fire.
It shows how much we love frameworks, right? That caught fire in that way. So let's talk about how that is not Ikigai, but there's something else that is, and it's much more expansive. It's much more nuanced. It has incredible potential to change lives.
Yeah, so at its very base form, it's alignment between actions and priorities, right? At its very base form. I think there's 2 Japanese words that I reference frequently. That is jinsei, which means lifetime, and sekatsu, which means daily life.
Hmm.
If you look at the Japanese scholars, they often reference Ikigai through the lens of sekatsu. So if we kind of translate that, essentially what it means is, when we think of purpose, human beings are just wired for like this. So if we think about purpose, we're often thinking about the existential, right? Like, what am I on this planet to do?
Sure.
And I think that's a natural inclination. But if you think about Ikigai through the lens of Sekatsu, or daily life, it's essentially, am I aligning my actions with my priorities on a daily basis? And if I have a lifetime of those days, then I'm living my reason for being, which gives us a lot more agency and control on essentially purpose, right? It's not like I'm constantly striving to get to that next checkpoint. It's more awareness, gratitude, appreciation of the moment, and an intentionality of aligning your values with that moment on an ongoing basis. Understanding that we're human beings, we slip and we mess up and we make mistakes. But if we have that foundation in place, and we always have that opportunity.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember reading about this and doing as much research as I could do. And it's interesting how much is still untranslated when you come across it. And it says, well, this has not yet been translated. And I think, gosh, this isn't shouldn't be so difficult to do anymore. But that it seemed to me that it was about starting the process, might be thinking through your day and almost moment by moment, looking for those places where maybe you always look forward to the sun coming through your window as you wake up in the morning, or how the ritual around how it is that you prepare your coffee or tea, probably in Japan. But so there was a sense of ritual, there was a sense of noticing, there was a sense of gratitude and appreciation. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is very rooted in the moment, right? It's a gratitude in the moment, awareness of the moment, and like the frameworks that we've created at Ikigai Lab starts to build on really 2 touch points. So one touch point is clarity on your values. So what are the core values that I want to be intentional about relative to my journey to get to this place and my journey on a go forward basis?
Yes.
So that serves as a foundation. And then above that, we incorporate strengths-based positive psychology.
Mhm.
So we leverage Clifton Strengths from Gallup organization, which essentially is you get these innate talents. And how
Yes.
do we deploy these innate talents in a way so I can, be in lockstep with these values, but also maximize my strengths in my personal, professional all phases of life.
And as you're using those two frameworks and looking at Ikigai as this moment by moment, both recognition and connection and appreciation, how do you make those connections between those frameworks and those moment by moment opportunities? And then I guess the second part of that question might be for those, and again, when I've talked about these concepts in front of groups of business people, we tend to be very goal oriented, very future oriented. To your point, what is my grand purpose here, right? Do I have a grand purpose in life? Is there a connection between those moment to moment opportunities and what that grand purpose might be? Have we been misunderstanding that, or is there a connection between our current understanding and how you're describing Ikigai?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a big question.
Yeah, that's why
So
we're here, Sam.
where my mind goes on this, which will probably be directional at best, is um, so 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 we leverage 6 dimensions of life.
Yes.
So social, physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and professional, if that's applicable. For students, we'd say academic. For our retired folks, we would pull professional off. But essentially, it's once I have clarity on the values, I have clarity on my talents and strengths, how am I going to deploy my energy in the world to um, to have impact, to drive positive outcomes, and those positive outcomes could be enriching from a financial well-being perspective. They can be enriching from a community-based perspective. They can be enriching from a social impact perspective. However you want to define that, but that gives a framework to start to deploy. Um, and then you had a second question there about the
Yeah.
outcomes. I think the big reason why we leverage Gallup's work is that I think Gallup does a really good job of linking um, a lot of these, we'll just call them softer skills, for lack of better words, like the softer skills, the self-awareness tools to quantifiable outcomes personally and professionally.
Okay.
So in the early stages of when I launched Ikigai Lab and I would knock on doors and I would talk to organizations and I would say, hey, let's talk about self-awareness and emotional intelligence. And let me tell you about this Japanese concept of Ikigai. There was a division in the room, right? There were some folks who were leaning in, they were interested. And then there were some folks who would lean back and cross their arms and say, this guy's lost his marbles. So there were enough of those learning lessons, we'll just say, where I realized there has to be quantifiable outcomes that people can gravitate toward. Whether it's in the workplace or it's in life, we want to have measurable impact that says, if I do this work, it's going to improve my life, it's going to improve the lives of others
Yes.
in some type of incremental way. So that's kind of a little bit of background on how the
Yeah.
combination of these two mix.
Well, and as you're talking about this, it seems to me that you could make strong connections, not just to, and there's so many great studies around purpose, right? And there's all this work around, I know McKinsey did several studies of the workforce during and after the pandemic and looked at one of the reasons for that workplace volatility that would follow this great resignation or a great reorganization or a great reset, whatever you want to call it, and decided that it was in large part due to a lack of connection to personal purpose, that people had left behind this awareness of what their own purpose was, which is connecting to values in a directional way, I think, as well, right? So it seems like there would be very good data that could support what it is that you're talking about with Ikigai. And the second piece that comes to mind is this idea of mindset, which I'd never used to really like because it was very squishy. But at the same time, the studies on mindset are pretty clear also, and there's lots of dimensions of that, of course. But gratitude, of course, being one of the entry points into positive mindsets, whether it's a stress mindset or a growth mindset or a mindset of grounded optimism. That gratitude piece is a huge part of what develops this healthy mindset, which is of course a choice, that ultimately drives good outcomes. Is that a fair connection to make, do you think, to Ikigai?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I always think about a very simple formula for behavioral psychology is emotion plus cognition drives behavior,
Yes.
right? So the emotion component of it is, it's just awareness of the emotional state. My palms are sweaty, I have butterflies in my stomach, and the body has cues. So sometimes if we lack that awareness of those cues, that can that can be at the steering wheel. So there's an awareness component there that I think is rooted or linked in some sense of just the muscle of gratitude, right? Because if you're going to exercise gratitude, that means there's introspection and reflection. And the more
Yes.
that you do that, the more that you can be aware from physiological perspective. But then the cognition component of this is where we incorporate the values and strengths, right?
Yes.
So it's like, all right, my palms are sweaty because I'm about ready to go in front of this audience and give this big presentation, or I'm going to go into a challenging meeting with a coworker where there's just some friction, right? Whatever that the thing is, if I have this observation of a physiological response, then I have the ability to translate that into, all right, my three core values are curiosity, creativity, and courage. How can
Yes.
I bring those forward? And then my top 5 Clifton strengths are learner, positivity, connected, strategic, and individualization. How can I lean on those to be more effective in this moment? So, that formula is great. It makes a lot of sense. I'm not here telling anybody that every single moment in every aspect of life, I'm leveraging those tools, but I think those tools have a lot of power that are that tie to this that work that McKinsey did, and then also the individual purpose and the exercise of gratitude, because it's just working a muscle in the same way that we have physical muscles that we need to exercise and work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you were to give somebody a prompt to start, not on the work that you're doing at Ikigai Lab, which I'd like to talk about in just a moment here, but to start to consider how Ikigai could be a significant idea, because I really think it is a bit of an idea, right, to bring into their life, how would you suggest that they start that process and start that exploration and maybe start even the work?
The easiest entry point is to think about a person that has been instrumental, influential, inspirational in your life. And I think it's it's especially important to pause, create space, make the time to reflect on that person and dig into, why does that person hold so much gravity in my life? And through that exercise, because it's oftentimes easier to reflect on somebody else and then interpret that reflection into who I am, how that shaped me, but then definitely who I want to be. And so I think that's an exercise that eventually will lead to an observation of one or a combination of values that are the base and the foundation of Ikigai. So you already heard this in my story. Taka and Shigeo, in particular, like Taka was very instrumental. My great or my grandpa Sam played that role. There's just a lot of people that I've been blessed to have in my life, and kind of going through that exercise. That would encourage everyone to go through the exercise. It really starts um, to inform, right? So I'm sure as I was describing that, there's probably people that are popping up in your head
Yes,
that played an important role in shaping your journey to what you're doing today and how you want to
absolutely.
show up going forward.
Yes, yes. No, I love that. And then what about this? You'll have to remind me the Japanese word of the day to day. What is
Mhm.
that word?
Sekatsu.
Sekatsu. So what about that aspect in our lives? If somebody is wanting to be more intentional, be more aware, be more connected to the moment and more grateful for the moments that we encounter, where do they start with that?
So I think about it through a couple of different viewpoints. So one is, you know, coming from a business background, MVP, means minimum viable product, right? So it's
Yes.
this philosophy of test, iterate, just test, iterate, test, iterate. So if you take product out and you put purpose in, but you leverage that same framework, I think that gives you a lot of power to explore, right?
Yes.
So like that's one frame, and then complementary to that frame is 3 zones in life. We've got the comfort zone. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the panic zone. In between those 2 zones is the growth zone.
Mm.
We are wired, and technology is advancing rapidly to support our desire to live in comfort at all times. So we want to click a couple buttons and have the food show up on our doorstep in 10 minutes. We are wired for comfort, and technology is advancing that rapidly. AI is supporting the advancement of all that. How do we start to re-engineer? And I'll take it back to those 6 dimensions of social, physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and professional. How do we start to re-engineer Sekatsu on a daily basis with an MVP framework? Take
Yes.
ourselves ever so slightly out of the comfort zone into the growth zone, recognizing that there's no saber-toothed tiger around the corner. Like, we're fine. We shouldn't panic. We're just on this growth trajectory of explore. And then probably embodied in some of that work is grit, right?
Yeah,
It's your
for
work.
sure.
So when I try something and it fails,
Yes.
how do I view that as a stepping stone to continue to grow, not the cliff, and I'm going to fall?
If you've been asking yourself, what's the point of all of this? Not just in your job, but in your life, you're not alone. Most high achievers I work with aren't lacking drive. They're lacking direction that actually matters. That's why I built Leading with Purpose at the Grit Institute. It's a step-by-step path to reconnect with what drives you, leads you, and sustains you, especially when things get hard. If you're tired of just checking boxes and you're ready to lead with intention, go to thegritinstitute.com/purpose/ and start Leading with Purpose today.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
Do you have a thought on that? I would love your thought.
No, I actually, there's so many directions to go with that. First of all, I love this idea of minimum viable purpose. I think that's great. So one of the things I think I heard you just say is that this MVP, this minimum viable purpose, is only in that growth zone. Is that fair? It's not in comfort and it's not in crisis, but it's only in growth.
I would say it's in the growth zone.
Yeah. Okay. I would tend to make an assumption that's not studied that is probably also the case. That's true. And yes, of course, grit is going to be part of any growth that we have. So that's, how do we fight I don't know if fight is the right word, but how do we respond maybe positively to this rapid advancement in technology and AI that is continuing to encourage us down into the comfort zone and out of that growth zone?
Big question. That's another big question. Probably comes a lot back to habits and routines and awareness, grounded in values. There's an interesting study that came out. It was published in HBR in April, I think. The title of this article was "How Are People Using Gen AI in 2025?" If you've seen this, top 3 use cases. Number 1 was companionship and therapy. Number 2 is organizing my life. Number 3, finding my purpose. Number 2, organizing my life. Number 3, finding my purpose, were not in the top 100 last year. So we've hit this inflection point with the rapid advancement of AI that there is a personalization component. And I've observed this with some of our different networks and groups that we work with, and these are mid to senior leaders that are making decisions based on AI as a coach and a support mechanism to make very important decisions in their life. So I think coming back to these, like, what are my values and what are my strengths, and how do I leverage those to collaborate and to partner with this technology and the advancements that are just going to change. It's advancing. We're at the slowest rate of change today. It'll be faster tomorrow.
That's right.
So just being more intentional about how I want to show up in life. And I think that takes a lot of work.
Yes.
And probably will take more work on a go-forward basis.
Yes, for sure. And that awareness, both of what is happening around you, but also awareness of your own, maybe even subconscious response, so that you can shape that in a way that is more reflective of your values. Does that
Yeah,
resonate?
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, tell me about your Ikigai lab and how it is that you're using Ikigai with companies today.
Yeah, so Ikigai Lab is a social enterprise. We focus on human sustainability and societal impact. The way that we do that is this old school, new school combination. So these ancient wisdom traditions that have been passed for generations, there's something in there that works. There's a reason why it's lasted for decades or centuries. But then we combine that with scientific, evidence-based research that provides the quantifiable outcomes on the why. So, and that's largely a good example that we've talked about so far would be Ikigai and strengths-based positive psychology. It's the harmony that exists between those two. The way that we activate within organizations from B2B perspective, we'll work with teams, we'll work with both senior leaders and teams that essentially maps with what you're talking about from that McKinsey research. How do you identify an organic bottom-up approach? Because most organizations have a mission and a purpose, and it's the plaque on the wall. There's oftentimes that gap that exists between me as an employee and that thing right there. So how do we help organically from the bottom, help these people have a better understanding of self, and then map that to the mission and purpose of the organization? But also there's typically an opportunity at the team level. So how do you create a team Ikigai so that they can rally around what's the reason for being that exists on this ops team or this sales team or this marketing team? So that's what we do from a B2B perspective. Strengths-based positive psychology plays a heavy role in that from a B2B. And then on the network side, we have networks where we work with purpose-driven leaders, cross-functional. We have a fellows program that we've launched through the University of Nebraska, where Clifton Strengths started back in the 50s. And we have a planner network where we work with certified financial planners that go through this process as a human being. And then they simultaneously observe opportunities to take this into the client experience. So that's the bulk of the work at Ikigai Lab. And then you participated last year with very high marks at the Ikigai Summit. We do this on an annual basis here in Seattle. We're in the process of rebranding that event. So I'll maybe tease this out a little bit to an event called Repurpose. That we are in this era where we need to kind of rebuild trust and redesign systems and rethink innovation. And so the Repurpose event will be happening later in the fall of 2000.
Fantastic. That's wonderful. What do you hope that the ultimate outcome will be of your work with Ikigai Lab?
Well, it's awareness and education. That's part of it, just bringing this wisdom tradition to the masses.
Sure.
I think there's an interesting touch point there. But then also just giving people a framework where they can be more intentional, right? So an addressable framework where people can identify their values and move their strengths. Yeah, there's great work that can happen in the workplace. Businesses do this, but it's as rewarding to sit with a bunch of college students that are kind of moving into this next phase and trying to grapple with what do I want to do for my first job and the changing landscape of the workplace, and just providing that framework so that they have confidence and they could step into that next chapter. So I think ultimately the goal is just to educate, draw awareness, and activate the framework.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's great. And as you think about the way that you're engaging with clients now and with people of all ages, one of the things that comes up is, as you were talking about the Venn diagram, misperceived Ikigai at the beginning and Ikigai today, part of that is the professional piece of it, as you look at your 6 dimensions as well, right? That professional is a piece of that, or academic is a piece of that. But Ikigai itself, as you describe it, isn't professional, and it doesn't tie to your job. So how do you talk to people about things that might be Ikigai within their job? But also, I think there's a lot of people that think, oh gosh, maybe I need to change my job. Maybe I need to change my profession. And maybe they do, but maybe they don't. So how do you tease that out and understand how Ikigai can play a role in your professional life, but also in your personal life separately and in concert with?
Yeah, great question. This is one of the silver linings coming out of COVID.
Yes.
So, within COVID, there was this awareness that the ability to take off one hat, put on the other hat was just impossible. We had kids running around in the background, we had dogs barking, right? And we were all at our kitchen table. So I think that the perspective on the workplace, some of that has gone away, unfortunately, but I think that kind of the beat of that drum is still out there. So I think there's this work-life observation, this recognition that who we are personally and who we are professionally, those worlds have interplay. So one thing that we often talk about is if you have a great day at work and then you have a rough day at home and then you come back to work the next day, you're probably not going to be as good as you were yesterday. Right. And a rough day at home could just be, I didn't exercise or I ate a bunch of junk food. So maybe you can fake it till you make it on day 2, but it's just not sustainable. And so from a business perspective, HR departments for a long time were doing physical wellness and they were saying, well, we'll throw you a gym membership, we'll do smoking cessation, we'll do all these things from a physical perspective. That was one of those dimensions. And the research is out there that the billions of dollars that have been spent on that stuff doesn't work. This doesn't move the needle. And so how do you get more expansive? And I think that more expansive approach was one of the major shifts that we saw start to occur in COVID. Now, then I start to lean on my old world in global asset management, and financial services. And what I've observed there is very concrete evidence. There's tremendous research out there on if you take care of your employees, then your P&L goes up, your stock price goes up, like everything gets better. So this platitude that used to get thrown around all the time about people are our greatest asset.
Yes.
And oftentimes people in that room would look around and roll their eyes like, is this person really saying that? Now the evidence is there to support that with rigor and actually integrated into financial products. So some of this data is being quantified in a way that's actually predictive to future stock price appreciation, which when it takes that realm, that's a different level of expertise and reinforcement on a lot of the squishy stuff that probably existed during pre-COVID.
Absolutely. And the military has always known that. And it's one of the lessons that I bring out in every single keynote for the Grit Factor is at the end of the day, when you take care of your people take care of the mission. It's the one non-negotiable if you are actually running an organization. Now, leading yourself is a bit different. You have to take care of yourself, which is just as critical. But if you're running an organization, that is your first job. And it's your first job, not just because it's the right thing to do, but at the end of the day, it ultimately is the most impactful thing you can do for the bottom line.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I think that maybe that's when we talked about some of the challenges with technology or AI, or I think that advancement on reinforcing that notion for humanity and the human condition and how that when we can unlock that potential, the positive outcomes that has across the workplace or in any scenario, I think that evidence is there and it's getting better.
Yes. Sam, you shared at the Ikigai Summit that will now be repurposed. I love that new name. The story of your family that you shared with us earlier in this conversation, and also that you had recently visited that shrine. I wondered if you could talk about going back to that shrine and what its status is in this over century-long journey now.
Yeah, thanks for asking. And I know you've recently visited Japan as well. I would love to hear your experience. Last year, March of last year in 2024, 36 family members from the United States traveled to Japan to participate in this ceremony with Shuji Ushio, who is the 49th consecutive generational head priest of the Imori Shrine, and his son Kotohide. I think Kotohide is in his 30s, so he'll be the 50th. And we participated in a ceremony that was designed to essentially pay our respects to Takan Shigeo and the ancestral heritage. So that was, that was a very powerful and meaningful experience. Not only to be there with my family and my siblings and their families and my father and then cousins, and so there was just this texture that existed in terms of you know Ikigai and the concept of purpose. But then going through that experience was pretty incredible. There's a small mountain's probably not a large hill, small mountain that some of us hiked to the top of. It's probably like 2,000. But when we got to the top, so I'm the oldest cousin of my generation. The next oldest cousin and I kind of took our time walking down. And so as we're walking down, she said, well, let's just stop here for a minute. And so we just stopped and just like took it all in. And so there's a short audio clip that I've captured. It's like a 60-second clip, and I'll listen to that. I have it in my calendar. I'll go back to that. But then she just made this observation. She said, how wild is it that centuries of our ancestors were walking here and like we're here now? So that was a really powerful moment on that experience. But thank you for asking. It was one of the most inspirational inflection points in my life. And I'd love to hear about your experience.
Well, I think our visit to Japan was exquisite and extraordinary and packed. And I think what it taught us is that we have to go back many times. What I was struck by among many things was how gracious the people were, I think, first and foremost. And we visited many of the Shinto shrines and also Buddhist temples. And what I loved, and I don't know about this, so I don't want to speak out of turn at all, but relative to our conversation here about Ikigai, what I loved about these Shinto shrines, some were large, some were tiny on the side of the road, was this sense of awareness of what is holy everywhere. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing. And that people were not just walking by these shrines, but they would actually stop and pray and do the ritual bows and claps and things that are part of that tradition. And it reminded me of how much we often miss in the opportunity to stop and notice, the opportunity to connect to what is holy in our lives, and the importance of ritual as well, the importance of place and the importance of ritual for those connections to what is holy and to what matters, and to the sense of gratitude of what that means when that is all around us. So I don't want to speak out of turn again because I
love that. I love that. Yes, that the spiritual awareness is integrated into the culture. What's always fascinating to me is the percentage of Japanese that identify as religious is very low.
Yes.
I mean, single digits, but it's almost their interpretation of what religion is. And probably the root of these questions come from like a Western perspective, but their interpretation of that is like, no, but they go to the Shinto shrines, they go to the Buddhist temples, they have these rituals and habits that are integrated into facets of their life on a daily basis.
Yes.
So it's an interesting study on just how one culture embraces spirituality.
Yes.
And integrates it into their life. But I love that. I love that you have that observation.
It really was very special. So we do hope to get back. There's so much Japanese history. There's so much international history. There's so much that I think we need to know and understand. And I've appreciated more and more as I start to read more Japanese literature, both modern and ancient. And I love that there's an entire era of Japanese history where women were the primary authors, which has been fun to recognize and fun to dive into, and really, really very beautiful understandings of both humanity and the connection to the natural world, which I think is something that really resonates, especially for us in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, nature plays a very important role.
Yes. Well, thank you, Sam. I know that this is a topic that people either have or will or both write dissertations about. So it's something that is very deep, very complex, very nuanced, and in some ways maybe more complex for Westerners because we often in our culture and our ourselves don't either have or don't recognize or don't honor some of those nuances quite as well. And I know when I've spoken to business groups about this, sometimes it can initially be the most difficult to approach because we have to take the time and take time to reflect, take time to consider. And many of us, myself at least among these groups, don't do very well at taking that kind of time and being that thoughtful and introspective. So I really appreciate you taking that time today with all of us and sharing your own journey, your own experience, and maybe several prompts that will help people get on their way.
Absolutely. It's, I love every whenever I'm in a conversation like this, I always come back to this is my Ikigai. Being in moments like this and sharing a conversation especially with a purpose-driven leader like yourself is at the epicenter of Ikigai. So I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and share this with your listeners, and love all the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Sam. If you were to tell yourself, your 21-year-old self, something that you didn't know that you wish you'd known, what would that be?
I always stumble with these types of questions. I always stumble because it's kind of like you learn and grow, right? It's like the good thing. 21 years old. So here's what I would tell them. So I went to the University of Nebraska, and I was there when the University of Nebraska, this will date me, was a powerhouse in football. And I was grappling with my degree was in finance, and I really loved marketing. So it was marketing, finance, and then I had some specialization in psychology and political science. And I was grappling with marketing, and I spent way too much time and energy determining whether I should have a double major in marketing or not. And I was just torn up over it. And what tilted the scales at 21 years old was Nebraska's football team. So translated as doing the double major would keep me there for another football season. So I could see the last football season, which was a great football season. I picked up the major that was the major that I have a lot of love for. And I guess to the 21-year-old me, I would have said, spend less time worrying about things that are your gut's telling you yes, but they're relatively inconsequential. But follow that energy in a way
Yes.
that is going to be the guiding force on a go-forward basis.
That's great. And what is your Ikigai? Besides this conversation, I'm sure this conversation is among
it's this moment, right? And I would bring it back to those core values: curiosity, creativity, courage, and the strengths, which I won't mention. But I think it's really just living with intention with that, and then also back to this taking yourself out of the comfort zone. And I love all the work that you do because it's when we take ourselves out of the comfort zone, but we fail.
Yes.
And if we're going to have the courage to take ourselves out of the comfort zone, we're going to fail. And so I think that's a big part of my personal Ikigai is the recognition and awareness that there's difficulty and a struggle in taking yourself out, but that's where the richness and the texture of life exists.
Yes.
And so once you take that step from that learning lesson, whatever that learning lesson is, like, that's more your reason for being. Like, that's more of your Ikigai. So it's more about it's the verb, it's the journey, it's not the destination type of stuff. So I would bring it back to that, which is not a, it's not a clear, crisp response, but I think it's about the act of.
One of the things that I love about that is this idea is that it's a verb. And that is something that I think anything that is important is a verb, right? It's not about having it. It's not about having found it or achieved it. It's about living it. And I think your explanation of Ikigai helps us on that journey for anything that matters. So thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
When Sam talks about Ikigai, he's not just teaching a concept. He's carrying forward a lineage, a way of seeing the world, valuing harmony, contribution, and meaning over motion. His family's story from Japan to here and back isn't only about geography, but about translation, of values into action, of tradition into modern life, of purpose into practice. And maybe that's what all of us are doing in our own way, translating who we are and where we came from into how we lead and how we live. Ikigai reminds us that purpose isn't found once and kept forever. It's something we cultivate daily, imperfectly, and together. If today's conversation sparks something in you, you can learn more about Sam's work at ikigailab.co and continue exploring what it means to lead with meaning. Here's to your grit factor.